I had a client at one point who was an unbelievably naive person. You cannot overestimate her naivety, no matter how hard you tried. Her parents taught her that adults were angels, literally. And she believed that in a strange sense. When I met her, she was in her 20s. And she had this extraordinarily naive view of people and had been hurt. And if you're very naive and you've been hurt by someone, you often disintegrate because it blows your world apart, and that's what had happened to her. And I said, she had a university degree, and I said, well, look, like in the liberal arts, I said, didn't you read any history? And she said, well, yeah. And I said, well, didn't that disturb the whole adults are angels hypothesis? And she said, well, I read it, but I just compartmentalized it. And that gave me the key to what was wrong with her, and we successfully dealt with it. But I had her, to begin her process of cure, oddly enough, because she had to understand malevolence, because she had been touched by it, right? She had to understand it, because her naive worldview had been shattered by the hand of malevolence. I had her read a book called Ordinary Men by Browning, and it's a study of these Polish policemen, German policemen who were sent to Poland after the Nazis had marched through Poland, and they were sent to police Poland, and they were, decent middle-class guys, essentially, most of whom had been hit maturity before Hitler had come to power, so they weren't indoctrinated Nazis, not like the Nazi youth types were, and they had to go to Poland and be policemen under wartime conditions. And they had a very humane commander, and he told all of them that they were going to have to do things that would be far more brutal in all likelihood than they were normally prepared to do in their role as non-military policemen, but that they could go back to their old job if they wanted to. So it wasn't top-down enforcement of an authoritarian ethos. And Browning documents their transformation from the guy next door, the policeman next door, into people who were taking naked pregnant women out into fields and shooting them in the back of the head. And it's a brutal book because, well, these men, it's like it just ruined them to do that to themselves. They were physically ill during the process of transformation, and he does a very good job of documenting how an ordinary person transforms into a Nazi murderer. And I had to read that. I said, but don't you compartmentalize it. This is about you, right? This isn't about someone else. When you read history, you think, well, that's about someone else. It's like, unless maybe you're a victim and you identify with the victims. It's a very rare person who reads history and identifies with the perpetrators. But unless you read history and identify with the perpetrators, then you don't understand history at all. And so who wants to understand that? And I get my students, I said, look, I've told them this for 30 years. Here's something you have to understand. If you were in Nazi Germany, the statistical probability is overwhelming that you would have been a perpetrator, right? You think you would have rescued Anne Frank. It's like, think again. Those people are very, 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 very rare. They put their lives on the line to do that. They put their families' lives on the line to do that. You think you're one of those people? Really? It's like that. All that means is that you know nothing. You know nothing about yourself. You know nothing about people. You know nothing about politics or economics or history. It's a harsh lesson. But
the truth about Germany in the 1930s, it was probably the most educated society the world had seen to that point in time. Education alone, cleverness in inverted commas alone, intelligence alone,
sophisticated civilization alone. No, right. So, absolutely. There's no substitute for character.
So we don't want, it's Pascal talked of the glory and the scum. To reach our full humanity, it seems to me we need to understand both intention.
Now, Carl Jung
the unbelievable scum that lies in terms of our potential at the bottom of every heart. The extraordinary nobility, you call it the spark of divinity, I would say made in the image of a mighty creator. You've got to hold those things in suspension if you to find your real humanity. And in fact, the way through to the good place is surely through the valley of darkness in the first place.
Well, then you think, well, if it's possible to be enlightened, why isn't everyone enlightened? It's like, well, you don't get to paradise, you don't get to heaven without harrowing hell first, right? And who's going to do that? Like, that's a terrible thing to do. It isn't even clear that you can survive it. No, I mean, it's brutally damaging to come to terms with your own proclivity for malevolence. And so people don't do it, and it's no wonder. But the funny thing is, and this is also something that I think that people who've been watching my lectures have been attracted by, especially the young men, it's like, until you understand that you're a monster, until perhaps you even develop that as a capacity, you don't have the moral force to do good. And so not only is that dissent to begin with necessary to scare you straight, right, to make you understand what exactly it is that you're dealing with, but you don't even have the strength of character to be good until you understand just exactly what sort of monster you can be. I have a rule in my book, Rule 5, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them.
Yeah, I read it.
It's a meditation on the monstrousness of parents. It's like, don't underestimate yourself, your capability to ruin your children's lives. You let them act in a manner that makes you disapprove of them. You will take revenge on them in ways you cannot even imagine. And unless you understand that, you're not going to be careful enough as a parent, and you're not going to set proper boundaries. Don't let your children annoy you. It's a very bad idea. Now, that means that you should try to regulate your proclivity to be annoyed, and you should try to be civilized, and you should talk to your partner, your wife, or your husband about your oversensitivities and foolishnesses. But having said that, you need to know who the monster is, and it's you. Individual malevolence is real. To constrain it inside yourself is extraordinarily daunting. To read history as a perpetrator is traumatizing. These are hard things. And then to think through the problems of addressing something like inequality instead of reacting to it in a knee-jerk, compassionate manner and implement policies on that basis that are going to be counterproductive, that's also extraordinarily difficult. So there's difficulty as part of it. And then I would also say, well, we haven't talked about the resentment that drives the discussion of inequality. It's not like everyone on the left is overwhelmed by compassion and that's why all these brutal things tend to happen. It's that they're also overwhelmed by the same sort of jealousy that Cain had for Abel and the same sort of murderous impulses that emerge very rapidly as a consequence of that jealousy. He has more than me. He must be a perpetrator. It's morally obligatory for me to take him out. Well, that's an easy message to sell. I read about how the communists dekulakized the Russian countryside. So imagine, it's Russia. You're in a village. It's 30 years, something like that, after the serfs have been emancipated. There's a few agriculturalists who've managed to produce successful agricultural enterprises. And, maybe they have a couple of cows, they have some land, they're able to hire a few people, and they're raising almost all the food, right? And they're a minority in any village because the hyper-productive, successful are always a minority. So they're a minority in every village. All right, and there's people who are doing worse, and then there's a lot of people who aren't doing so well at all. And then the communist intellectuals show up and they tell the people who aren't doing so well, some of whom are just suffering because of life, but some of whom aren't doing well because they've never done anything productive with even a second of their life. And the communist intellectuals come in and say, those guys that are doing so much better than you? Yeah, they actually stole all of that from you. And you're morally obligated to go take it back. It's like, oh man, after 6 cups of mead, let's say 10, or let's say 20, and I'm drunk out of my mind, and I've got my cruel buddies with me, and we're all resentful right to the core because we've wasted our miserable lives, and now we have an opportunity to go down the street to our wealthy neighbor's house and to rape his daughters, and we can do it in the name of good. It's like, well, there's a story you can market. And that happened everywhere in the Soviet Union. And so they wiped out the kulaks. It's like, great. And then 6 million Ukrainians starved to death.
Yeah, that's right.
Brilliant.
Yep. I'm a farmer.
Brilliant.
The Ukraine was the breadbasket of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was. Mm-hmm. Then it became a region pathetically unable to feed itself. And yet, the same sort of worldview that gave rise to that, we're now being told, you use the word neo-Marxist. Many people in Australia use the word cultural Marxist. I've got an old friend who said to me, what are you talking about, John? Free capitalist Australia is not going to let that happen here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Qantas Airlines took a nice step towards that the other day, and they adopted their language policing policies. These corporations who should know far better let these far left fifth columns into their organizations. They think they're not going to pay for that. They think they're going to stop with some demands for the reconstruction of language. Not like the demands for reconstruction of language, by the way, are trivial. They're maybe the most important thing you could possibly demand, right? I want to reshape the way you speak. I want to reshape the way you think. It's like, well, that's okay, as long as it doesn't interfere with the bottom line. It's like, it'll interfere with the bottom line. You let that fifth column in. It's a warning to corporate people. You let that fifth column in, man, you're going to regret it. You're going to regret it. So, and things can turn on a dime, you know, a very well-organized minority, even if the majority opposes them, and they do. A very well-organized minority can have an unbelievably pernicious effect on an organization.
Margaret Mead's made that point.
Mm-hmm.
Societies change direction when a small group of people decide to change its direction. That's the way history works.
Well, that's what happened in the universities.
Speaking of the Lexus, where did the 50 grand come to just drop?
Oh, Cordy gave it to me for blowing away Cobain. Oh, I can't believe I just slipped up like that. Oh, God. And here's the greatest thing. I'll never be tried or convicted for the murders of Kurt Cobain or El Duce. Never.
But I told Alan, my friend, who I'll let the FBI catch him.